Rich Hollenberg is a up and coming, rising. He's still got so much more to capture in his sportscasting career, and he is part of the Syracuse brotherhood, if you will. This is a place where they breed high achievers, and Rich is certainly one of those in the business. A lot of great things have come his way in the biz, and much more too as well. He is on Twitter at Rich on Sports. We're going to talk about his career and look at it because it is very inspirational what he has had to overcome personally, professionally. And this is the On to Something podcast. Certainly, Rich has a couple of things he is on to with his work, but also the underlying theme here is why Rich is inspirational. And we're going to have fun talking about that. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor for Fox Sports Radio. I'm on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. So, Rich, I really appreciate you doing this. Obviously, at ESPN college basketball broadcaster, you're with the Tampa Bay Rays as a broadcaster. You do a lot of other things as well. When you look at what you've done so far, and again, so much more to come in your future, but what would you say is your greatest display of courage in this business?
Wow. First of all, thanks for having me, Bryan. Second of all, that was quite the setup because I turned 50 about a month ago. So I feel like I'm on the back nine of my career.
No, you're
like
just getting started, man. That's what I want to make sure.
I really appreciate that. You know what? No one's ever asked me that before, but if you're pointing the question toward courageous, I could give you two answers. And the first is taking a job at Home Shopping Network. I'm very proud in the fact that I could probably say, and I don't have the facts to back this up, but I could probably say I'm the only national sportscaster who used to work at Home Shopping Network. And the reason I did was I moved down to the Tampa Bay area 25 years ago for a sports job. It was a local sports job as a sports director. And about 2 years into that job, Home Shopping Network, for those of you watching or listening who aren't familiar, is based in St. Petersburg. And I was doing some freelance work for ESPN on the side, so much that I left my full-time job that I had moved down here for. So I had a lot of free time. I was making money as a freelancer, but I had a lot of free time. And I got a call from a local agent saying, there's this new thing called Fox Sports Net, and it's starting up and they're looking for programming. Do you want to audition to host a show on Fox Sports Net? This was back in the late 90s. And I said, absolutely. Well, they're using Home Shopping Network studios. All you have to do is drive over there. It's only 10 minutes away from where you live. So I went over there, hit a home run, nailed the audition, only to come to find that it was a show that combined sports and sales. And I said to them, I don't sell stuff. I'm a sports guy. And they said, well, it's called contextualized commerce. What we want to do is sell sports memorabilia, but we don't want to do it on a shopping channel. We want to do it on a sports network. And Fox Sports Net is brand new. They're looking for content. It's a perfect marriage. So fortunately, I was able, through a couple of different degrees of separation, to get in touch with Al Michaels, believe it or not. And as we all know, Al is a legend in this industry. And I got on the phone with Al. He didn't know me from Adam. All he had seen was my very early demo reels. And I said to him, should I take this job? Am I crazy to take this job? And he said, if it was 10 years ago, Rich, I would have told you you're nuts. But the walls are starting to come down. And a lot of these lines are starting to get blurred. And keep in mind, like I said, Bryan, this was back in 1999 that he was telling me this. And so I took Al's advice and I took the job. And I would say that was the most courageous move that I had to make, because I wasn't sure at the time, as a 20-something-year-old, if I was already cutting my career off at the knees by going on a shopping show and selling things on television. Turned out to be a really fun experience. And what I've learned in the ensuing time is that just by saying yes to opportunities like that, other doors open, you meet other people. Ironically enough, as an aside, I ended up meeting my wife on that job, and we're still married to this day, 20 years and strong. So I think that took a lot of courage on my part. And it also took that little extra push that I got from a legend in the business like Al Michaels to kind of push me over that finish line, so to speak.
All right. So you brought up your wife. So I want to get to the first interaction, how you met her, and what was her perception of you the first time she met you?
She told me, and I've learned to be very vulnerable as a broadcaster and on podcasts and things like this. She told me she thought I was a metrosexual, and I guess I took that as a compliment. I took pride in what I wear and how I presented myself on camera and all of that stuff. I was buttoned up. I was ready to go for this national sports job, and I'll never forget sitting in the atrium at Home Shopping Network, waiting for my name to get called to go in for my audition, and in walks this beautiful blonde-haired woman, and I looked at her and I was like, A, I love Florida, and B, I got to know who this girl is. And it turned out that she was looking for me because she was an associate producer on the show and took me in. We hit it off. I got the job. She worked on the show as an associate producer, didn't know the first thing about sports, but knew how to coordinate interviews and schedules and everything like that. And we were friends for about 8 months until things just kind of aligned, and I got the guts up to ask her out, and she said yes. And the rest is history, as they say.
Looking back now at all these years that you've been married, what do you think she's most surprised in you? Or what do you think that when she first met you, that she knew about you, but how you've been able to, I don't know, impress her or do things that have very much put you onto the next level career wise?
Well, I think that's a tough question to answer because I think we've been through so much, as most married couples do, the ups, the downs. We have 3 children at this point now. So I think the one thing that might have surprised her about me is that I was not in this business just to be famous.
For sure.
I didn't want to just be on TV like a lot of people who get into this industry are all about. And now, as you know, with the advent of social media, you could be famous without being on TV. But back then, when I was first starting out, if you wanted to get on TV, you had to live it. You had to grind. You had to work your way up that ladder. My first job in TV, Brian, was in market 172 in Great Falls, Montana. And that was only a year or two before I moved to Florida. So when she met me, she wasn't sure who I was, really. She just knew that I was the host of the show, and she assumed I had a big ego and I was high maintenance, and just like most people would from a distance. But like I said, we were all in this together. We were kind of in the bunker, so to speak, together because it was the wild, wild west. Fox Sports Net was brand spanking new. Our show was brand spanking new. We made up the rules as we went along. And I think what might have surprised her was the creative side that I brought to the table. I wasn't just coming in, hand me my scripts, and I'm going to read off the teleprompter, and then I'm going to go home. I was in it. I wanted to get my hands dirty. I wanted to help create this show, and I wanted to see this program succeed. And I think she might have been surprised by the fact that I didn't fit into the cliche that so many people assume sportscasters or just television personalities may be.
No, you didn't. And perhaps part of that is tied to your humble beginnings. And we're joined by Rich Hollenberg with ESPN, Tampa Bay Rays, and beyond. He's on Twitter at Rich on Sports. I'm on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. Let's go back to Montana and the grind and the long hours and you just getting started and what it was like a day in your life working those long hours and covering those events where, like you said, being on television, the thrill of that, you needed to have a lot more pride in what you did beyond just the love of being on camera. And what would I have seen from Rich as far as his work ethic, as far as his determination off camera during your time in Montana?
Well, you would have seen me calling highlights of a rodeo, Brian. That was my
Oh my
first
gosh.
sportscast. I think back on those times so fondly. Listen, again, full disclosure, I'm a Jewish kid from New Jersey. I had no business being out in God's country in the Big Sky area, but that was one of the things that I convinced myself was the reason to take the job. first of all, like I said, I live that just say yes credo, and I pass it on to upcoming broadcasters and journalists who are looking to break into the business. That's what I tell them. Just say yes. It was my first job offer in television. So I wasn't about to turn it down, but $13,000 a year, living in an apartment that my mom almost fainted when she saw it the first time. It was not a pretty picture, but I shot all my own video. I edited my own stuff. I produced my own sportscasts. And just like the show we were talking about moments ago on Fox Sports Net, which was called The Daily Sports Source, with my sportscasts on the weekends at KFBB TV in Great Falls, I was able to create a sportscast all by myself. The news director, the late Dick Pompa, when I got the job, he hired me over the phone. We had never met in person. When I got there, I said, "What can I do? What can't I do?" He said, "It's your show. You could do whatever you can as long as you don't cross any lines that would get us in trouble." So it was an ABC affiliate. So I said, "You know what? I'm going to talk about Monday Night Football. I want to treat this like it's a network sportscast and not just a Market 172 sportscast." They don't have any professional sports teams. The closest thing they had was the rookie league Dodgers affiliate there, the Great Falls Dodgers, who was managed by the great Mickey Hatcher at the time, who hit that home run in the 1988 World Series, if you recall. So I was able to create a sportscast that I thought I could be proud of, and then I thought could market me to whatever my next job was going to be. But like I said, my very first sportscast, I'll never forget it. I led with the rodeo. My next story after the rodeo was American Legion baseball. And then I went into Major League Baseball scores and things like that. But you have to lead with what's local when you're a local sportscaster. And I'll never forget, I tell this story a million times. We worked with a foot pedal for a teleprompter. So you write your scripts, you rip them, and you lay them on a conveyor belt. Now, anybody who's not as old as I am, who's hearing this is like, "What are you talking about?" But this is the way it used to be with teleprompter. And so you lay it on a conveyor belt, and the projector projects it onto the camera in front of you, and you control the speed with a foot pedal. So I read my intro to the rodeo, and then I look down to read my shot sheet of the highlights of the rodeo. And wouldn't you know it, Brian, I forgot to advance the copy on my sportscast. So I look back up, and I'm about to start reading the same thing that I read to lead into the rodeo. So that was my welcome to TV moment. And I never forgot that moment. I never forgot to advance the teleprompter copy, whether it was by a foot pedal or a little hand joystick or something like that.
Knowing what you went through probably makes you, Rich, that much more grateful for where you are today. Rich Hollenberg is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. So here's a question for you. You talked about stacking shows and aligning your sportscast and what you're going to lead with, and you said the rodeo. If there was a sportscast aligned on Rich Hollenberg's career, and you were able to stack up what's the most important thing in the lead, and then go from there. Not to put you on the spot here, Rich, but maybe something that would be the lead, the most important part of your career that's underrated, that people wouldn't expect, but you hold a lot of pride and joy with.
Wow. I would say I would lead with something, anything that showcases my passion for not only sports, because I was a sports fan my whole life. That's why I do what I do, but something that shows my authentic passion, because that's what carries through the camera to the viewer. That's what makes the viewer lean in. That's what makes it more of an active activity instead of a passive activity. Most people watch TV, they're sitting on the couch and they're really not doing anything. They're just clicking the channels. But you want, as a sportscaster, whether it's play by play or a pre and post game show or anything like that, you want the viewer to lean in. You might say something or say it a certain way to get them to say, "Wait a minute, this is important. I need to pay attention." So whatever it is, whether it's covering a Super Bowl, which I did numerous times, to a buzzer beater shot in a college basketball game, to covering the Rays on their run to the World Series last year. I don't make any differentiations between any of those things in the 2+ decades I've been doing this. But whatever it is, I hope that what's leading my sportscast of my life shows that I have an undying passion for what I do. I consider what we do, Bryan, as a craft. It's not a job. And I think the only way to succeed is to view it that way. If you think of it as a job, and yes, it's a grind and it's hard and you have to have thick skin and all that stuff. I get it. But if you wake up every morning knowing that you're doing what you love, then it doesn't feel like work. It's a cliche, but cliches are cliches because they're true. And that's how I feel about what I do, whatever job I do, is I have an undying passion for it. I would do it. Don't tell my bosses. I would do it if they didn't pay me. But luckily I get paid to do what I love.
Rich, how are you a beacon of hope? And how do you want to be a beacon of hope for those who are coming up in the business, and you being that inspirational, influential figure in so many people's lives?
Well, I appreciate you saying this. I feel like the check should be in the mail already, Bryan. All the kind things that you're saying about me. I don't know how much of an inspiration I am, but I do know that I've had to overcome some things that, some people may or may not be aware of. About 15 years ago, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. That is usually considered pediatric diabetes or juvenile diabetes. But what I came to learn is that there are lots and lots of people just like myself, adults, who also can be diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I had my challenges on the air with that. I know people in the diabetes community who also work in television, and they've had it a lot worse than I have, where they have fainted on air. That's never happened to me, fortunately. But having to deal with that and knowing that that's something that's never going to go away for me, and having to be mindful of that at all times. An example would be meeting a stage manager for the first time at a basketball tournament I'm working. And, a lot of what they do is make sure that you are in the most comfortable situation to be at your best when you're calling a game. So I'll never forget, it was a stage manager. Her name was Casey. And she said to me, "Is there anything you need, like any special things?" And I'm not going to say, "Yeah, I only want green M&Ms, and I want, I want my water to be at room temperature." It's not like that. But
Yeah.
if there are certain things that you like, she's willing to go to the craft services and get it for you. And I said, "Look, all I need is a Snickers bar and a can of Coke on standby, because I have diabetes, and if my blood sugar drops low, it could be a danger zone for me." So things like that. I don't know how inspirational that is, Bryan, because I've lived with it for so long that it's just part of who I am now. But I do work with the JDRF, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Fund. I work with the DRI, the Diabetes Research Institute, which is based in Miami. It would be nice to know that I bring some level of understanding about what diabetes is, and that it's not just a disease for obese people, or it's not just a disease of a certain race, color, or creed. Anybody can be diagnosed with diabetes, and I think I'm evidence of that. So that would be one way I would hope that maybe I could be an inspiration. And then the fact that I've always felt, even though you mentioned I went to Syracuse, I'm part of the Newhouse Mafia. I am undyingly proud of that. And my first two jobs got me there because of being a Syracuse alum. Literally, I had a professor who told me about those two jobs. So I'm not saying that lightly or with my tongue in cheek. Syracuse got me my first two jobs in the business. But aside from having that connection to Syracuse, I've always felt like somewhat of an outsider. I never said, "I'm going to be a play-by-play broadcaster," or "I am going to be the next Bob Costas." Bob was my idol, but I didn't know where I wanted to be in sportscasting. And I look at a lot of my contemporaries. Dave Pasch comes to mind. I mean, the list is endless. They are, I think, at such an advanced stage of where I am now, that I've always felt like a bit of an outsider. And yet I'm still in the game. I'm still working at ESPN. I'm still covering a professional sports team. So every time I get a little down or get a little concerned that my career isn't advancing still when I want it to be, I think back to 20 years ago and say, would you be happy knowing that you not only have one job, you have two jobs that are incredibly fulfilling and allow you to scratch more than one itch in this industry that you love? And obviously, the answer is yes, a million times yes. So I think it goes back to the fact that you have to have a level of gratitude in your life. And in this job, it's certainly no different. Every time my contract comes up at ESPN and I get that call that they want to re-sign me, the negotiations are not really negotiations. It's a 5-minute phone call and I'm done. I don't have an agent, so I negotiate myself. You can imagine how that goes. So it's an attitude of gratitude with me every day. I love my job, and I love that there are certain people who think I'm worthy of continuing to do the job that I do.
I can hear all the gratitude coming from you as you're speaking. Rich Hollenberg is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. You might not have an agent, but in a metaphorical sense, you are an agent for others in terms of wanting to grow the next generation in sportscasting. And I know one of the big projects that you're working on is mentoring younger folks and helping them in the business. It's one thing to spend a couple moments with the next generation and give them some advice. It's another thing to do, Rich, what you do. Why is it so important for a business and an industry where there's a lot of me, get me here, get me there, where you have taken such a selfless angle to this, where it's not just about your rise, but it's also seeing others come up as well?
Well, thank you for mentioning that, Brian. I remember years ago meeting Lou Holtz, and one of the things that Lou told me that stuck with me to this day is he talked about making a list of 100 things you want to accomplish in your life. And I'll never forget, I went back to my hotel room that night, this was years ago, and I start scribbling down madly. And after like 17 things, I ran out of things. I'm like, I don't know what else I want to accomplish. So one of the things was buy my own house and get a dog. And I'm like, are these really the things that Lou Holtz is talking about? But all kidding aside, one of the things that I wrote down was I want to teach. Once I establish myself in this career, I want to give back. I want to teach. Now, ideally, would that be at Syracuse? Of course it would, but I can't move up to Syracuse now to be an adjunct professor. When the pandemic hit a year and a half ago, I started seeing because of Zoom, I was popping into Newhouse classes more. And I was speaking as a guest lecturer and things like that. And then I had people from Newhouse reaching out to me. Hey, would you mind taking a look at my demo reel? And I had a lot of free time on my hands. Baseball season was cut in half. I was already done with my basketball responsibilities. So I started going over demo reels and getting on phone calls and Zoom calls with these complete strangers, except we had one thing in common, and that was a love of sportscasting. And it seemed that to me, whatever I was telling them was in some way, shape, or form helpful. And that made me feel good selfishly. And I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe it's not teaching that you're meant to do, but this is at very least the next best thing. And it's a chance for me to pay it forward. And I had so many people like Al Michaels, and the list goes on and on, of people who were so kind to me. I stand on their shoulders, and I wouldn't have been able to get to where I am in this business had it not been for the people who helped me. So I want to be one small part of somebody else's success in this career. So starting this business, which I'm about to launch now, is just my way of paying it forward and my way of giving back and seeing, instead of a one-on-one type of a scenario, how many people can I reach if I really put myself out there and advertise the fact that I'm doing this not to make money, not to get my name out there, to help other people learn and grow where they might not have had the same kind of feedback that I'm able to give them, because feedback's really tough to get in our industry, as you probably know, Brian. It's a big boy network. And if you're good, you probably don't hear anything. But if you're bad, you'll hear about it right away, or even worse, you'll be out of a job. So I just want to help the aspiring journalists and sportscasters out there get as much of a leg up on not only their skill set and the craft of sportscasting, but also on the ins and outs and the intricacies of the business of sportscasting as well. And I've learned, hopefully, enough in the last 2.5 decades to pass some of that information along to the next generation.
Well, a term they throw out there is he or she is one of the good guys in the business. And definitely that term has Rich Hollenberg's name on it because he certainly is hearing what you are doing. You brought up Lou Holtz, a football coach, and you've certainly, as somebody who's covered so many different events in sports, you've worked with football coaches and basketball coaches and talking to them and interviewing them, and on the baseball side and speaking with players and managers. You are a coach right now as well, based upon the venture you're doing now. So what is different about the way in which, say, a football coach coaches and the way you are going to coach when you get this enterprise out there and you really start to have the effect and the impact on others that you're going to have?
Well, I think, Brian, it goes back to something that I mentioned earlier. We have to all have thick skin, right? There's going to be a lot more no's than there are yeses. And one thing that I will promise any aspiring journalist who wants to hop on board and go on this journey with me is I will treat them the same way I treat my children. I have an 18-year-old son, a 16-year-old daughter, and a 12-year-old son. And the one thing that I tell them repeatedly is, I'm just going to tell you the facts. I'm not judging you. I am not name calling you. I am not attaching labels to you. I am just calling it like I see it. And that's what I plan to do with everyone who jumps on board, because I think that kind of feedback is so lacking in our industry. And the higher up you get, if you go from a local level to a regional to a national level, it's harder to get that kind of that type of critique work or that type of feedback. The higher up you get, the bigger the audience might be. So I want to be that sounding board for everybody. I want to be an ally at the same time. And I want ultimately for them to realize that I'm not out for anything other than to see them succeed. Because if they succeed, then I succeed. And hopefully they'll finish the program with me. And the first thing they're going to want to do is pass it along to their friends and the students who are coming up behind them. And then all of a sudden you start this chain, and you realize that you're just a link in this really long, never-ending chain of people who are like-minded, who want to succeed in this business and want to succeed in this business for the right reasons. So I'm very big into motivational quotes and speeches and things like that, and there'll be plenty of that in my program. But
Yes.
there's also going to be a lot of real talk, and you might call it tough love, but there's going to be nothing but transparency and honesty, because like I said, as I want my children to grow from those lessons that I try to impart on them, I'm going to want these students and these young professionals to feel the same way.
Yeah, I think, and perhaps you would agree with this in a way, Rich, is that sometimes when we're coming up, we have a little bit of trepidation over who we want feedback from, because maybe if we send it to this person, we might not get the answers that we want,
Right.
or maybe that person who we get the feedback from might have our best interests or might feel like your competition. So might say things that might not exactly be transparent, but that's the difference between them and you, and how you come across. You spoke about your children. What brings you the most joy in being a father of three kids?
Ooh, so much. I mean, listen, I'm far, far from perfect, and they'll be the first ones to tell you that. The joy I get, and they're old enough now that I could say this because I've experienced it already, even with my 12-year-old, is seeing them be better than I ever was. And that's really all you want as a parent. You want your kids to be better off than you were. Certainly financially is one of those aspects. That has yet to play itself out. My oldest is 18. He's going to college next year. So we're still a ways off from how successful they're going to be financially in life. But in terms of how they treat people, in terms of how they are thought of by their peers and by the people around them, their teachers, all of those things. I feel like my kids, and obviously it's due in large part to my wife. It's not just me, but they're such good citizens already that makes my heart swell with joy. And I know I'm just a little part of that, but when you see a little bit of yourself in them and you see how much better they are because of it than you ever were, that's, I think, where you can check the box as a parent and say, okay, they might hate me from time to time and they might say I'm the worst father in the world and all of that stuff. But every once in a while, I think you can check that box and feel pretty good about yourself.
Rich Hollenberg is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. So I want to leave you with this. My final question. You talked about them having a little bit, seeing a part of yourself in them. What little part of yourself do you aspire to see in what Muhammad Ali stands for? Knowing that he is such that inspirational figure, somebody who you had the opportunity to meet.
Oh, wow. I go back, I'll call it my relationship with Muhammad Ali. I use that term loosely, but I go back to when I was in second grade and I read a biography on Muhammad Ali and had to do a book report on it for Mrs. Stein's class at Woodside School in second grade. And all I wanted was to nail the cover of the book as the cover of my book report. But I'm not an artist. Turns out my mom is a really good artist. So I cried myself to sleep in second grade one weekend because I could not get the cover of my book report the way I wanted it to look. And I woke up from that nap, and wouldn't you know it, my mom drew the cover for me for my Muhammad Ali book report. That began my love affair with Muhammad Ali. I've read multiple books on him. About 20 years ago, I went to a cable convention. I was working for a cable company, and he was making an appearance there. And he had already long since lost a couple of steps. He was dealing with Parkinson's, and there was a line that was snaking through the convention hall, just waiting to take a picture with the champ. So, of course, it doesn't matter how long it's going to take. I'm going to get my picture with Muhammad Ali. But I said, I can't just go up there and take a picture and walk away. So I went up there and I said, give me one of these, champ. And I was hoping that he would, but he didn't. He was just kind of staring straight ahead. I mean, when I say hundreds, Bryan, there were hundreds of people. You can imagine how tedious that is for anybody, let alone the most famous man on the planet. So I took my picture and I just whispered in his ear as I was walking away. I said, "You're the greatest. Thank you." And as I got past him, he went, just like that. And I saw it at the corner of my eye and I was like, did he just tell me to come back over to him? So I did. And I leaned in and he tilted his chin up a little bit and he said, you're a pretty boy. And I said, not as pretty as you, champ. So I have this picture proudly
wow.
in my office. That's my picture with Muhammad Ali. And it's one of my prized possessions, obviously. And the sense of his prominence, he had all the bravado, obviously, on the outside of it. And listen, he was not far from a perfect man, just like I am, just like we all are. But his sense of place, where he knew a simple joke to a young man, calling him a pretty boy, or lighting the Olympic torch in 1996, knowing his sense of place and being able to summon whatever amount of energy was necessary to elicit a response from the crowd at any given time, big or small. His ability to shine in any moment, whether it was in the ring or even to a greater degree outside of the ring as a civil rights activist and a humanitarian in his later years, I think is just the most profoundly inspirational thing that I've ever encountered in my life. And of course, it means that much more to me because he's an athlete. And I deal with athletes all the time. There is nobody that has ever come close to having that great of an impact on my life than Muhammad Ali.
And Rich, if you're in the ring or the gauntlet that is sportscasting and you're in the midst of a broadcast, you are shining and certainly radiating that positive energy and those vibes and those motivational words to others like Ollie did. And I can see little bits and pieces of Ollie in your character and how
Thank you,
that
sir.
is certainly one of the compliments that I think is most important to get across here, because not just of your drive and what you do from a personal standpoint and what you stand for, but also how important it is to affect that next generation, which is what Ollie did, what you are doing as well. And I can't wait to see the way in which your mentoring takes off. I'm looking forward to seeing how this all comes about, and I'll be on your side just like you are, and we all are for Ollie. Rich Hollenberg on Twitter at Rich on Sports. I'm on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. Rich, thank you so much for telling your story.
Bryan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.